Thank you. I know it's late in the day, and some of us have been here since yesterday, so I thank you for coming at this hour. We're going to be doing a couple of things today. I'll actually, since I've already been introduced, I'm going to skip the introduction and we'll just go to the first slide, which will basically, I'm going to be talking about 4 key points today, and we'll come back to these at the end. So we'll talk about the correlation between price and quality. We're going to go in detail through a pricing formula. I'm going to do that on the flip chart over there. We're going to talk about pricing as mindset, money thinking. And we're going to look at the idea that you certainly need to know your numbers and be pricing product by product, but then there's something that happens when you look at your product mix all together and your pricing formula as an entire business that can be a very useful strategy. And thank you, Farm Nerd, for this t-shirt, for being the button pusher today. I usually don't like people who push my buttons, so. So quality and price. So really my point here is that quality and price are correlated. And at farmers markets, there's room for all 3 levels of quality and price. There's low point quality and price, mid, and high. And the point isn't that farmers markets need to be geared toward and focused on mid and high price points. There's certainly room and a need, I would say, for all 3 to be present at farmers markets. So you can fill any one of those niches and do well. The key is to be consistent between your price and quality. What doesn't work is when there's a disconnect between what you're offering in terms of quality and what you're offering in terms of price. And so obviously low quality products at high-end prices don't sell. But there's that mistaken notion that, there's something wrong with this product, or what's the catch if you have nice quality products that you're offering too low. So there's this thing about consistency between price point and quality that is an important factor in pricing success. We'll keep talking about that, but I'm seeding this idea now. So the pricing formula that we're going to look at is this one. But I wanted to say this is sort of a standard textbook pricing formula that you see, which is costs plus labor plus your profit margin equals wholesale. And then if you take your wholesale, multiply it by 2, you get a retail. So another way of writing that, without it being broken into 2 steps, is cost plus labor plus profit margin times 2 is retail. And you'll see this fairly commonly in textbooks, online, as a way for pricing products. A pricing formula that I think fits better for the farmers market sector is when you take your fixed costs. So you take costs and you divide it into fixed costs and variable costs, and we'll look at what both of those are in a second, plus your labor, plus your profit margin, and then you add costs of selling separately. Now, the reason for times 2 wholesale is a recognition that often at wholesale level, they're multiplying approximately by 50%. But of course, that's so vague and inconsistent that it's not really helpful as a strategy. So to take the costs of selling, which is the cost of selling at farmers markets in particular in this session, and separate it out and then just add it in instead of doing this times two gives you a better, accurate sense of your pricing. So we'll start with the first part of that, which are costs. So for those of you, some of you might know this language and terminology fairly well. Some of you, it might be new, so I'm not assuming prior knowledge around these terms. I'm explaining them here. Your fixed costs are the things that don't change whether you sell 1 unit or 100 units or 1,000 units. These are things like rent or office supplies, your phone, your electricity. They kind of churn in the background, and many of them are the things that you capture in your bookkeeping for your small farm or your small business part of your income tax. Some of you, by the way, will use farm, and some of you will use small business. It's worthwhile to know which one you're going to be submitting in terms of taxation, because you might as well set your records up to correlate with those columns that CRA sets up for you. And then your variable costs, often also called costs of production. So this would be, these vary depending on what you're selling. So the seeds for a certain crop, maybe the supplies for a dress, if you're a dressmaker, a percentage of greenhouse space used. Certain kinds of equipment would be under variable costs. Large assets tend to go under fixed costs. Smaller or product-specific equipment would go under variable costs. Now, okay, so that's good for that one. So what you want to do for your fixed costs, once you have gathered them for at least a year, is that you add them all up and you divide by some unit that makes sense for your business. So this dressmaker example, it might be the number of dresses you produce per month. For a farmer, it might be bed space in a garden or crop by weight. That would depend whether you're doing sort of greens and flowers versus potatoes or carrots. For winery, something like bottles produced. So this gives you a unit of cost to assign to each item you produce. And remember, if you're doing something like dresses per month and you've got a fixed cost by year, you're going to have to divide that accordingly. So if you would, and then your variable cost. So, let's go back. So what happens when you don't know your fixed costs? Because let's say you're new to this pricing and you haven't done a good job necessarily of capturing your fixed costs for the year. One place to start is just your household bills. Another place to start is to ask other growers at your market. And another place, you can go online and sort of Google these typical business models, and they'll give you some starting places for filling in these numbers. Not particularly helpful, I know, but it's the best we can do when we don't have those fixed costs. Then your variable costs. The thing that gets people in trouble with pricing is that it's hard to accurately capture all of your costs. And we think that there's little costs like bags and twist ties or labels, gas for cultivator maybe, but what about the gas for your snowblower? I'm from the East Coast. We're spending a fortune on that. Your pricing doesn't make sense when you're not accurately capturing costs. So the good news, of course, is that you're only going to do this once in a while. You don't do it once and then never do it again. You might do it every 3 or 4 years. And you only need to do it for a few products in your product line. The key here is to take the time and make the investment to know where your costs are and what your cost of production are around a few representative items in your business. It does take time, and for some of you, it will drive you crazy. But anybody who makes money in a business knows their numbers. It's hard, I would say almost impossible, to be a successful entrepreneur and not be able to run your numbers on some of your products. Okay, go on. So then labor. So that's the first part of the formula. I'll just start it over here so we have this visual. We have costs. And what we've done is we've done our fixed costs and our variable costs. Now we're going to add labor. And what do you want to pay yourself per hour? And some of you will run your costs, and you'll run them at, I'm going to use the example of $17 an hour, and you'll look at your cost of your product, and you'll say, oh my God, that can of salsa would cost me $18 to bring to market. So suddenly I'm going to reduce my labor costs and see if I can change that. Before you do that, think about this question. I mentioned this morning in the workshop that we did at the Duncan Farmers Market. If I'm handing over my product to a grumpy, awful customer that I don't like, what wage will I have had to have received to make me feel like I'm willing to do this over and over and over? And over and over and over. And if the answer is, what did I say, $3 an hour, that doesn't feel good. I have a business client right now. When she started with me, she said, the reason I'm here is because I went to my accountant, we went over my books the last 2 years, and he said to me, every time you hand a product over to your customer, you're also giving them 50 cents. So not only was she not making money, her personal money was going to support her habit/hobby, what she called business, but came to realize wasn't a business at all. And a big piece of that was changing her tendency to always pull back on the labor side whenever she felt like she couldn't put her product where it needed to be. Because remember, do you really want to do this for $3 an hour? So if we move on to the next part, so I've said what you do is you just figure out how long it takes you to make a certain batch. So this might be an item, it might be a batch of something, like if you're doing bread or cookies, it might be a crop if you're doing greenhouse or field crops. Everything from buying the materials to having it ready to load in the truck to sell. Now, I don't want you here in this labor part to include the time that it takes to get to market and to sell it. We're going to capture that somewhere else in this formula. But how long does it take? And you multiply your labor rate and then divide it by that number of units of production and you get your labor cost per item. So the labor is sort of a cost per item. Now let's go to the next slide. And so the next part of the formula is plus profit margin. And these are the kinds of things you can say, but I'm happy. I'm getting $17 an hour. It's covering my costs. If I add a profit margin, that will price me out of the market, and I'm happy doing what I do for $17 an hour. That feels good to me. Or I'm in farming to make a living, not a profit. I don't like profit margin. I don't like this technical language. I don't need more than a fair basic living wage. So if we go to the next slide, I'm going to give you 3 compelling reasons why I want you to rethink that and consider adding a profit margin to your formula. The first one is that cost capturing. It's very difficult to capture all of your costs. Virtually impossible. There are holes in all of our business funnels. Think about a sieve or a strainer, and we put something in and stuff comes out. And for some of you, you have very big holes. And one of the jobs of doing more accurate pricing is to shrink those holes so less is coming out. Secondly, to pay back your initial investment. So if you are running as a corporation, what happens is you put in money into a business, and then what happens? The shareholders get their money back over time. How do they do that? It's based on the profit margin. Because the profit margin is the only chunk of a $1 that goes to reinvest into the business or to pay back investment. The rest of it is covering your costs and your labor. The third thing is growth. If you're constantly taking your $17 an hour, what you earned as labor, and using that to grow your business, you're always back in this spot where you haven't paid back your own investment. So once you've paid back your initial investment, the only way to grow your business is to have this piece called profit margin. And then, lo and behold, I actually have a 4th reason. If those 3 weren't enough, it's because otherwise you're just kidding yourself. What I've come to know working with people is that they come wanting very tangible, tactical, practical business advice, strategies, financial information for growing their businesses. But what's actually happening is that they want to make themselves feel better about what they're doing. They want to legitimately contribute to their family. They're tired of kind of hiding this sense that I'm not reaching my own potential. Profit margin, you not using your family's money to grow your business, is a way for you to get to that feeling like I'm making a difference and I'm contributing in a way that I feel good about. So where are we now on the slides? So we're at the first part. We've got costs plus labor plus our profit margin, which, so let me just say that if you're nervous about this, just start with 5%. Just add an additional 5% into your pricing formula. She mentioned in the introduction that I had a farmers market-based business that I sold in 2013. I had run that for 20 years and half a season, 20 and a half years. And by the time I finished those last few years of my business, I was up around 45% profit margin. In our sector, that's terrific. But it's nothing compared to what companies make. Think about these big companies. They're making 50, 200, 2,000% profit margins. So I'm not asking you to be the Sobeys. That's one of the chains out east. But starting here, moving somewhere in the 25% range, getting yourself up to 40 and 50% profit margin, that allows you to do things in your life that you're not able to do when you're hovering around 2 and 3%. But start here if you're uncomfortable with that. So then instead of wholesale times 2 equals retail, what I said is that a better way is to actually add the cost of selling and shipping as a final unit. So then we add plus costs of selling. For many of us in the farmers market sector, it's not true in all markets, but the cost of selling will be less than times 2. And that's why this is helpful. Times 2 can be a bigger chunk than really what your costs of selling are. But don't forget that it includes things like your display costs, your labor, and not just, 4-hour market, I was there for 4 hours. No, you traveled there, you got home and unloaded and put things away. All of that counts as time spent selling. Okay, would you? So that's the basic formula. And then the bad news is that it's never a complete formula. It doesn't stop there, and it doesn't translate. Each one of you can't do your pricing exactly like that and think, perfect, because there's a few nuances. So the first one's what I call the wow factor. Sometimes you can price something much higher simply because it's so amazing, so different, so unique. An example I'm looking at TED here is wild food preserves. You can sell, in Nova Scotia anyway, you can sell a bottle of jam, 250 ml bottle of jam, strawberries, even if we're talking wild blueberries, which is Nova Scotia's #1 agricultural export, by the way, or organic strawberries. You'll get anywhere between $4 and $6.50, maybe $7 an hour, per bottle, depending on the labeling, the branding. You have wild high-bush cranberries. You have anything from Cape Breton, from the woods in Cape Breton, and suddenly you can double, sometimes triple those costs. And Ted is certainly doing that in Quesnel here in BC, selling wild food preserves. Now you can't do that if you, so let me come back to that example as we move through the PowerPoint, because it's a good example of what I'm going to talk about in a minute. So if we just move forward one more. Remember, in commodity agriculture, profit margins are around 1/4 to 2%. Grocery retail is around 3%. That's across all commodities. They have loss leaders where they actually lose money. Average is 3%. The grocery industry is huge. They get by on numbers, not on gross profits per item. But individual products in your mix can make good profits. So If we go to the next slide, I'm holding this thought. Selection is key. As I grew my business, what I came to notice was that the people who had more product sold more. And as I tentatively grew my business, I noticed that as I had more to offer, I sold more of everything. There were times that I identified things in my business that I didn't make as much money on. And I would pull them out of the equation. And one of them was soap. We did a line of soaps with herbs that we grew and processed, and I had a soap maker making them from scratch. And it never was very cost effective. And so there was a period of time that we scrapped the soaps from the company, and our whole business went down. And what I realized was that because it was soap, and I was selling a lot of interesting wild plant products. We cultivated about 3 acres of herbs, and we're doing all kinds of things with them. But soap was a really great gateway product into my business. People are comfortable with soap. They like the smell and look and feel of soap. And it was a way that I got a lot of new customers who then bought other things. And when we took soap out of our business, it meant fewer people found something to approach us with. So we added the soap back in. And I always thought, okay, this is what they talk about lost leaders at the grocery store level. That was mine. I had to realize that I had things in my business that I made very good money on. But I just had to have consumers to buy those products. And by having a range of products, some of which I made a little bit of money on, it allowed me to sell more of the things that I made a lot of money on. Does that make sense to you? So one of the things that I see in farmers market and agriculture training is how do you do pricing, figure out what is not working, and get rid of it. And there are certain things that if you're losing money on, it makes sense to get rid of. But if there's certain things in your mix that allow you to have a nice broad selection, as long as it's helping you sell other things, the selection is more important than focusing on the actual profit you're making on every single piece. Does that make sense? So we'll move on. So then I'm going to go back over here. For some reason, I like it better. I'm less on the side. There we go. Remember, price is just what somebody will pay you. It can be very arbitrary. Price is based on costs and inputs. It's based on figuring out your product formula, but it also can include this wow factor. It's about supply versus demand. And most importantly, it's about the perception of value. And this is what I'm going to try to convince you of here in the next couple of minutes. So commodity pricing and commodity marketing is brandless, storyless, contextless. The only thing that commodity marketing and commodity pricing does is talk about price. So in the absence of really understanding what makes a product unique or special, what the result is that a product does, people make their decisions based on one thing, which is price. So there's somebody at your market who just went and ordered a custom-made bed from a local woodworker and paid $3,000 for it. And then they came to the farmer's market and they noticed your beans were $2 and your beans were $2.50, and then they walked over and bought them from her. It's not because they didn't have 50 cents. They just bought the $3,000 bed. So when they notice the 50 cents, it's because they don't know what's the difference. And this is where you as the business owner, this is what marketing and branding is all about, is making sure that people understand what are the values, the benefits, and the reasons underneath your product. That's when price fades away and benefits and the enrichment of their life by buying from you versus somebody else comes into play. So you're always up against this, which is when people don't know how something is really benefiting them in a tangible way, we love to get a deal. Everybody at every spectrum of the socioeconomic scale is driven by this when they don't see another value. But it certainly fades away when people feel like their wants are being met. So we can't compete here, and we can't compete here. So we need to clearly articulate the benefits that people get by purchasing our product. And that's when price begins to fade, and it's one of the last questions they ask rather than the first. Now, of course, you put your pricing up front. But for example, we were at the Duncan Farmers Market this morning. One of the things I saw is a great example of what I'm talking about here. There was a booth and they had their canopy. So you know how the canopy tents have that extra like hangover, and on that piece of the fabric you could put anything you want. And what I commonly see is people put Wolf Family Farm, let's say. It's a mistake. It's fine to have your little logo and your farm name on the side, but you say they put artisan handmade pasta. It doesn't matter what their business name is. It matters what they're selling and why it's special. So if your business name tells your story, that's fine. Like the local source. That's a shop in Halifax that's all about selling local food, and they source it all locally. But most of us have business name and farm names that are based on our family or whatever. That's not the message. That's an image. What's important is what we're doing, the result that we offer. So maybe we'll go ahead. And I just reminded you, think about something in your own life that you love. It might be a brand of fair trade coffee. It might be a place that you go stay with your family. I don't know what that is. But there's something in everybody's life here that they would pay ridiculous amount for, and they wouldn't want to admit it to anybody. But it's because it just so perfectly fits something about who they are and what they value and what they love. It's this whole thing in marketing that what you sell to people is what they will use or love or benefit from. Use, love, or benefit from. Use, love, or benefit from. And so marketing, pricing is just, it's your base point, but marketing is really about moving that price point up a little bit to capture the benefits and the results that you're offering people. You don't want to be playing the dollars game. You want people to come to you because they know, I gave this example this morning too. It's not actually about the fresh tree ripened fruit. That's the thing in the world that represents a certain taste experience, that represents a certain flavor, that represents a certain nutrient profile. But if there was something else that did the same thing, they could buy that too and would. Because it's not actually about the peach. It's about that flavor. It's about that nutrient profile. So we say to our customers, well, it's local, it's organic, it's handmade, but people don't necessarily know what we mean by those terms. These are kind of buzzwords, and at best they don't get some of this. Some percentage of people who shop at farmers markets are very product knowledgeable and very, they have figured out the why underneath these terms. But the vast majority of people, they like that it's homemade, but they don't really know what that means. And so if you have something homemade and you have something homemade, well then I'm just going to compare on price. because there's nothing that I know about your homemade versus your homemade that's different. So, and of course, at worst, they understand it incorrectly, and I gave the example this morning of certified organic. For some people, that term simply came to mean it's more expensive. Production methods didn't matter to them, and so then they were left thinking about price. So one of the things that I do in my business training programs is we take all of these words, local, organic, handmade, we put them on flip charts, and we brainstorm what are the values actually underneath that? Why does somebody care that it's organic or handmade? So I have a couple examples on the next couple of slides. So all of our products are handmade in our studio, which means, and this is the little technique or tool, you wouldn't necessarily say this like this. What it actually means for this studio owner is that there's no toxic glues, local students find summer employment when they come home to us, the product lasts longer, and it's cost effective in the long run. So these, the no toxicity, summer employment for students, youth in our community, that it lasts longer, that it's cost effective, those are what that person means when they say it's handmade. But we need to spell that out for consumers, not assume that they're going to know that because they don't. So then another example is we grow our produce organically, which means our customers aren't eating food that's supported agrochemical companies, no residue, our farms teeming with birds and wildlife, keeping waterways clean. Inspection process says that we're telling the truth about all of this. Those are what organic means for this person. That's what they communicate. Well, no. In Canada, there's no such thing as organic unless it's certified. The term has been taken so that... So, they don't buy your product for its own sake, and they don't buy it because of you. They buy it because your product represents the solution to a problem or the fulfillment of a need and want. You sell more and at a higher price if you get really good at explaining to people the value and benefit of your product. I say masterful marketing isn't about you or your product, it's about results, values, and benefits. And so it's another such common mistake I see in the farmers market sector is we focus on, well, I do this and I do that and I do this. We tell them that we make, let's say, jam. I use my grandmother's old recipes that were passed down for generations, and I use organic sugar. Okay, let's just use those two examples. Well, let's turn that around. The jams that I use help preserve traditions and recipes from a bygone era. That's something that people like. It's not about me, it's about what they like. And by using organic sugar, you don't have GMO beet sugar in your product, because cane sugar is non-GMO, but if it isn't, say, cane sugar, it is GMO beets. So I just turned that from something about me and what I do into something that's about them and a benefit for them. So comparison pricing, new farmers market vendors tend to do this, but actually many farmers markets have this idea that what we should do is walk around and see, we have Brussels sprouts, what are you and you selling your Brussels sprouts for? Will either be the same or will come in around the same on everything. Well, given my druthers, I would much rather see every farmers market business with pricing this more like this. Because no two businesses have the same cost of production for every given item. You can't really make money unless you're honoring the specifics of your situation. And it perpetuates the idea that farmers market pricing should just follow commodity pricing, which is everybody's the same. But of course it isn't. Somebody might grow carrots easily because they have the right natural kind of soil, and for somebody else they have to put it in raised beds and have irrigation because it doesn't grow as well on their farm. But there's no reason that I can't have my Brussels sprout pricing here, my potato pricing here, my carrot pricing here, and you have your carrot pricing here. You don't even grow Brussels sprouts, and your potato pricing differently. So, and the other point to this is, it's not about the Brussels sprouts and the carrots and the potatoes anyway, because him and I could be each growing the same line of products, and customer A would rather buy it from me, and customer B would rather buy it from him. Because who I am and who he is are two different things. So even though we have the exact same product, we don't have the exact same product because it's not about the product. It's about the experience, it's about the relationship, it's about the values we're able to articulate or not. And of course, that's what branding really is. Another thing about pricing is there are certain things that you could price as low as possible and still nobody wants to buy it. And it's because there's no value in buying something that looks like it's just an interest of yours. It's this whole idea of matching your production and your pricing with what people really want. In the absence of an obvious benefit, it looks like you're just selling it either to support your own interests or to make some money, and that turns people off. It's because people don't buy what you sell, they buy why you do it. That means the benefits, the results for them. And there's many things that just don't even belong at farmers markets because they don't sell in a farmers market context. So it isn't really, in this case, a price issue. You could lower the price and lower the price and lower the price, and it still barely sells. This is more like a value, a lack of value. And then we've come to money mindset. Some of you will go home, you'll use this formula, you'll come up with some prices, and you'll say, eek, I can't sell that for that price, that doesn't feel good, I can't do that to my customers in my community. There's lessons there for you. Some of it is about scale. For some of you, you need to move your scale of production up so that some of those fixed and variable costs are spread out over more units of production. Some of you need to drop some products out of your product line because there's things that are lost leaders, meaning you're only making a little bit so that other things make a lot, but there's other things you're literally losing money on. But more importantly, I think, than all of that is that owning a successful business, part of it is that solid pricing strategy, and part of it is saying, I can't and won't do this for less than, $10 an hour. So what does that mean? There's inefficiencies, you can fix them, there's products you can change, and then when you've done all of that, you just need to stand in the truth of your pricing and not... And so I keep pointing to Ted because he gave me a couple of good examples when we were driving from the airport. He brought me a couple days ago when we both flew in. And he said, we made this, they do birch syrup in Quesnel. And he said, my wife came up with this salad dressing using the birch syrup and some other spices. She put it in these nice bottles and figured out the price at $12.50 a bottle. And I told her she was crazy. We'd never sell that stuff for $12.50 a bottle. But his wife didn't say, oh, honey, you're right. I'll only sell it for $8. She said, the cost is $12.50 a bottle. And what happened was they sold the salad dressing. There was a value in that product. He may not have seen it, but she knew it would resonate with their customers. That was the cost, and she took it to market at that price. And she used Facebook. I'm going to do a session tomorrow for on marketing your farmers market, so strategies for, not for marketing your business, but for marketing your whole market. And one of the things that I say for sure is that our ideal customers are all on Facebook, because they're women just like me and like your wife. Yes. So the correlation between price and quality, this is like a summary slide. Farmers markets need products at all levels of price and quality, and there's money to be made at each one. How you do that is to have good branding for what you're doing and to stay consistent within those three constituencies. This is a pricing formula that works by and large with some tweaking and understanding the wow factor, and you need to go home and run some numbers. If you don't think you deserve to make more than $3 an hour, or if you think, well, it goes back to that client of mine with the 50 cents. Here's my beautiful whatever she's grown. She's a florist. And here's 50 cents of my life savings to go along with it. For her, it was very, very scary because she needed to do some significant raising of her prices in order to claw back that 50 cents and then maybe add 50 cents rather than giving it. So a lot of the work that we did, it was easy to figure out her pricing. It was much harder to have her figure out that she just needed to stick with that pricing and not be nervous about it. And then thinking about pricing per item, you need to know your numbers, but you also need to know that there are things in your business. If you can sell lots of things that make good profit margins in your business, you can afford to offer a bigger range of things, some of which make a lot of money, some of which make lower money, but that as a business model together, it works and makes you money. So we have 15 more minutes for questions, comments, thoughts. Ingrid.
The 5% loan, start with whatever profit margin, taking 5% of the cost and the labor.
Yeah, you're taking 5% from the price without it. So you add up the price without it.
So you add those together and then you add 5%.
Well, in this case, I would also add the cost of selling, add it up without the profit margin, re-add it back in. Yeah, this is a good point of clarification. And then you set your final price. So include everything, take that 5% or 7%, 1%, whatever you want, and then add it on. Yep. No, profit margin and markup are two different terms. You could do times 2 resale. Markup is actually it's misunderstood. It's very different from your profit margin because your profit margin represents out of $1 what is profit, sheer profit, doesn't cover any of your costs. Markup is just a percentage above your wholesale costs that represent a retail portion. So it's just two different. And one of the things that you'll often find is that you pay your staff more at the beginning than you pay yourself. It's fairly common that comes out. One of the things that I did in my business too is I did pricing based on, so we captured labor related to production in the garden because we did field production and then we had a value-added part of the business. So we actually separated those out and we paid in the formulas had a different price point for the labor that went into the field production than we did into the value-added production. So sometimes I'm just saying that even under that labor, you might have to break it down. Maybe it's staff versus the owner. Maybe it's different areas of production. But I want you to run that and see if you can pay yourself the same that you pay your employees. James? Yeah, right. His profit margin, he put it in at 80%. Well, it is part of it is that as much as I love farmers markets, I don't think they are the end all and be all for all of our production sometimes. There's some times when there's a limit to what farmers market customers and ambiance and vibe will allow for, and some of us are creating products that need to be in different venues. I think there's always more, though, that you can do to show people that the value of this honey versus the value of this honey, that they're two basically very different products. I know, I heard you say you think you're doing a good job of that. I just, that's the way to handle it. It's just more of that. One thing I want to say is that a mistake people make, in Nova Scotia, we have tiny rural markets all the way up to big city markets, all within a 3-hour drive of each other. So there are vendors, certainly in the province, making a living in the farmers market sector because they're going to multiple markets, but they don't do the same display or even sell the same groups of products in different markets, the ones who are smart. They know that at this market, this sells at these prices with this kind of packaging and display, and I have to do it differently here. So again, it isn't about your product, it's how is it seen and received in the community. But I also want to challenge you a little bit. We did a farmers market vendor training program in Cape Breton, which for those of you who know Nova Scotia, of a have-not province, it's the have-not area of our have-not province. There was a couple in the training program who came together. They were retired, and their thing was that they went out into the woods and picked all of these wild berries, partridge berries, highbush cranberries. They were making preserves and making juice. Their pricing wasn't anywhere near where it needed to be. And I challenged them, and nobody in our community will pay any more money for this product. And I said, you're wrong. I just know you're wrong about this. You're undervaluing what you're doing, and I don't believe that people don't see the value. I think what you need to do is tell people what is special about all of these wild berries. Well, that was in the spring, and the next, maybe it was the fall or early the winter, they were at a farmer's market meeting that we had, and he came over and said, damn it, you were right. Even in that context, it was more that they had such a belief that their community wouldn't pay more, that was the story they lived by. And they just needed somebody to say, you know what, that maybe isn't true. Well, I think I tried to make that point when I pointed to James and I said, we could have the exact same product, but we actually don't. Because who will buy from me and who will buy from him will be, potentially we could have the same customers, but there can be two people at the farmer's market selling the exact same thing, and we will attract different people. And it's partly because of what we say, but my point was it's also just who we are as people. Certain people will like me and my vibe and the way I put up my signs, and other people will like the way James does it. And at that level, it's just a personal thing. There's no rhyme nor reason to that. That's some of the psychology of marketing and pricing, is just trusting that I will find my people and he'll find his people. And it's part of why I try to get people who take the programs to realize competition isn't really about the product. And 2 people, 3 people at a market could have the same thing. And all we do is bring in more people, because my people want to buy Brussels sprouts from me, and they want to buy Brussels sprouts from you, and they want to buy Brussels sprouts from you. It is. And those things aren't about your pricing or even what you say. They're more about who you are and the relationships that develop because of that, just very human connections we build. It is, yeah. But think about farmers markets 15, 20 years ago. What did we all say as we were sitting around these tables was, nobody knows what the farmers market is. We have to do so much education. And now people do know. This whole thing of customer and consumer education is ongoing. People 5 years ago didn't know about chia seeds and superfoods, and now we do. It's part of our culture. It's language that rolls off people's tongue more easily than just 5 years ago. So you'll never get away from that. You can have a business, and this is, again, I feel sometimes like I state it too much, but production is only half of your business. The whole other half is, how do I communicate? How do I have systems that make sense? How do I make money in my business? So it's business skills, production skills. They're not the same, and you need both. And so you have a big communication issue in your business. Yeah. There's this level, there's an understanding or an assumption that everybody could do what we do, and that what we do isn't particularly special. And I guess in theory, everybody could do in this room what everybody else does, but not really. We don't have the skills for it or the interest in it. What we do is special. We get in these bubbles and we think, everybody's creative, everybody knows how to produce things. Out in the real wide world, the people in this room are incredibly special. We have these special tech skills. We have a special way of interacting and living with the land, and it is valuable to people. So I love your comment, which is find out from other people who love us what we're doing right, because we don't see it, and it's part of some of that mindset. Even the word, like lactose intolerant, it's a great example. Gluten-free a little bit, but it can actually turn people off if you're not careful. So just using those words, we think, we're targeting a certain group, but if we say them in a way that turns other people off, it's not working for us. So there's other ways of saying that, or even explaining the gluten-free, that I think is more helpful than just gluten-free. And that's, again, some of this, which means. So great point there. Okay, I want to let you go because it's been a long day. Thank you for coming.